welcome back to Books, a monthly video series where I talk through some of the things I've been reading recently and tell you what I thought. Hope you're okay. We're finally getting into the lighter months of the year, which is brilliant news, although it has been very stormy here in the UK. It looks like there's going to be brighter days ahead, which is just great news all around, to be honest. It might sound like I'm in the toilet at a 90's birthday party, or like I've somehow hidden the whole of XOYO under my living room sofa. This is not the case. Basically, we have some protesters outside who are lecturers striking for their pay and pension. Obviously, full solidarity, and I'm really glad that they are taking direct action, but they are playing some bangers, so you might hear those in the background. And also, they have a sign that says honk for education, so if there's some beeping from cars, it's because people in the UK who are driving in London are really for education, which is great news for them and for the world, but slightly less good news for this video and the audio quality. I am gonna just get straight into this. This video is coming a tiny bit later than usual, so there's a few more books than usual, which is great. Can't complain, they are bangers. The first few books I read this month were all by Japanese authors in translation, so that's a fun theme. The first one was by Genki Kawamura, and it's called If Cats Disappeared from the World. The premise of this book is pretty simple. Basically, a guy finds out he has one day left to live, and then the devil appears to him and offers him a deal. And the deal is you can sacrifice one thing in the world and get an extra day of life, and you can keep doing that basically infinitely. So you don't get to choose what disappears. So for example, you might get rid of candles and live an extra day, and then you live in a world without candles. And basically, one of the really fun things about this premise is that lots of people have done it before, so there are lots of things that don't exist and that we don't remember existing because they were wished away by someone who made a deal with the devil and only had one day to live. So it's quite good to think of like things that could have been disappeared from our lives that we didn't even know about, or what we would actually benefit from having disappeared from our lives. And that's kind of one of the philosophical questions that the book gets into, is if this thing was disappeared from the world, what difference tangibly would it make to our lives? Fascinating. Some of the items that go missing are things like clocks, phones, films. The book, in the way that a lot of Japanese books in translation are written, and I don't know if this is down to translation or a stylistic cultural thing coming out of Japanese contemporary literature, but it's got a very simplistic, straightforward, direct style with kind of absurd metaphors and similes and imagery. It's a really sweet book. It's a quick read, and it follows this one man as he discovers what is most important, what has been most important to him in his life within the context of only having one day left to live perpetually. Also, have to take a moment to show you this, the foil lettering, so nice, and there's a little foil on the eyes of the cat. Like, it's a really nice addition. It's otherwise completely uncoated, really minimal, except for this, this little cat with the foil eyes. Such a sweet addition. Published by Picador. Really, really nice. Yeah, I would really recommend this. I think it's a sweet, uplifting read. I also read another short book by Tahi Sahete. This one's called Astral Season, Beastly Season. Look at the cover design. So good. That's what drew me to it initially, and I'm sure it's what draws many people to it as well. And it has this kind of, I like the way the illustration here is deliberately sort of blocking out some of the text on the back as well. It feels like whatever this is, the illustration is kind of taking over and breaking all kinds of design rules, and it just feels really fresh and exciting as a design. And this has come out from a publisher called Star. Here is what you'll get from the blurb. A long time ago, in a passage for either English or modern Japanese class, I read that at 17 you stop being human. You stop being human and you become either a star or a beast. The first half of this book is written in a letter form from a young teenager to a pop star idol that he admires. And the second half is a diary entry of one of his classmates. This so doesn't feel like an appropriate song for talking about murder, but okay. It's hard to describe the narrative of this text without spoiling it, and I think there are some really good twists and turns, so I don't want to accidentally reveal any spoilers if you are thinking about reading it. It follows two high school boys who are in the same class but don't know each other until their favourite pop idol is arrested for murder, and then they sort of bond through this. And that's about as much as I can say without spoiling it. The narrator is really interesting. It really reminded me of Catcher in the Rye. It's very opinionated and kind of, they're a pariah and a bit ostracised from society, and they have all these kind of strange opinions that they've picked up from a lot of time spent alone, basically. And the narrator generally assumes that other people don't understand them, don't understand the way that they think, and couldn't possibly have as complex an inner life as the narrator does, which is one of those very solipsistic approaches to life that you see a lot in literature, where, for example, he runs into a girl on the train who he goes to school with, and after they speak, he's surprised by the fact that she's actually quite nice, or actually quite genuine and sincere and deep. Whereas at school she's mean and cold and all of these things. So it's that kind of pariah-ish narration. And then after all the events unfold in the first half in the letter, and it's revealed why it's a letter and all of those things, we then move straight to this completely other narrative in the future, which is the diary entry of a classmate, and it kind of looks back on some of the things that have happened in the meantime. The book left me with lots of questions about what had happened, which it can be a really good thing, but I was slightly frustrated just that it didn't delve into some of the things that I was really wondering about emotionally for these characters. But otherwise it was extremely gripping. I found myself racing towards the end just to find out what was going to happen. And it's written in a really unusual way, really strange, a really strange narrator that is hard to empathise with, so quite a challenging read in that sense, but quite interesting. Be aware that there's some descriptions of murder, and it's quite a violent book. I am working my way through Murakami in a random order that is based on what I can find in secondhand shops or the library. So this was the next one. I found this in Oxfam the other day. It's called Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World. Don't love this cover design, but you'll see that the Hard-Boiled Wonderland is written in one font and then the End of the World is written in another font. It's basically two stories that go back and forth throughout. We follow the character through one which is quite a futuristic, scientific, magical world, and then there's a more, feels almost medieval, fantastical world. They're both fantasy worlds, or they both have a sense of magical realism. I would say the first of the two stories, the Hard-Boiled Wonderland section, although this is never referenced, it's just what I've inferred from the text. The Hard-Boiled Wonderland section is more of a magical realism, and the End of the World section is more of a pure fantasy. As with Murakami works, it's quite strange, and I don't know what we are meant to pull from it in terms of the meaning. It was a very enjoyable read. The only thing I'll say is that I didn't particularly enjoy was there was a overweight female character in the book, and it was just kind of weirdly objectifying, fetishizing and derogatory the way that Murakami wrote about this woman. I think this is a common criticism of Murakami, is that the sex and the women stuff is quite objectifying sometimes. So do with that information what you will. What I have to say about Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World is it was first written in 1985, and one of the main premises of the Hard-Boiled Wonderland section of the book is that it's kind of a dystopian reality where people work for tech companies who harvest massive amounts of data, and the data is really financially viable as an asset. And I just thought that is really prescient, because now there's a huge cultural conversation about how much data is worth and how we can protect it. So it was just kind of amazing to read something from that time which was already exploring that world of computer technology and data. Yeah, kind of incredible. Quick spoiler warning, if you don't want to know this, just skip ahead. As you get towards the end of the book, the two stories converge. So the protagonist finds that essentially the protagonist finds out that they're going to end up in the second world that we've been reading about the whole time, and we realise that the second world is the future of the protagonist's first world. The book ends on quite a melancholy note. We expect the protagonist, I think, to make a grand escape from this situation that they found themselves in, but actually they just accept that new reality that they found themselves in and just progress on with life. So it's quite an unusual ending, which I found really interesting and satisfying, but it might not be so satisfying for some readers. Overall, it's one of Murakami's better books. I've enjoyed it, with the exception of the comments about women in this one, which felt outdated. I thought the story itself and the experimental form with the two stories running parallel and then conjoining was really interesting. So yeah. Worth a read overall. A quick novella next. This has just come out from Faber Editions. Obviously it's stunning, it's lovely, it's a tiny little thing. This is a republished dystopian novella by an author called Kay Dick, who, if you're not aware of her, go and look her up. This was originally published in 1977 and had basically no critical success because it was probably just a bit ahead of its time. I love Kay Dick's work. This is so different from anything else in her oeuvre, and I'm really glad that it's been unearthed and republished, and also it doesn't hurt that it has a foreword by Carmen Maria Machado, author of In the Dream House, which is one of my favourite books of all time. It's a memoir. As Carmen Maria Machado says, dystopia is the genre that is the access, it's the gateway for a lot of people to literary studies and to literary or philosophical thinking, because dystopias or speculative fictions tell us something about the world that we're in a very accessible, straightforward way a lot of the time. Animal Farm, for example, is a book that a lot of people encounter at high school age, which is a really accessible allegory and dystopia. They is slightly more obtuse, but it's equally frightening and chilling in the way that it's written. It's essentially a series of vignettes following our unnamed protagonist, who is living in a world where they are this unnamed force that has taken over, and they are anti-art and anti-creativity and anti-making anything beautiful or anything that would be considered surplus by a Tory politician. So nearly everything that makes life joyful. Through the vignettes, we learn that if you're seen in society to be having too many emotions, to be enjoying too much art, to be making things, to be reading things, they will come and they will take away the things that you make art with. And if you make a stand, i.e. resist, they will take you away to a facility where there are television screens on all hours of the day and there's no light until you are basically an empty shell of a person, after which you'll be returned cured or fixed of all your memories and emotions. It's a really hard-hitting book in places. To say how short it is, we get a really good sense for how scary and terrifying it is to live under these conditions, and the people that we meet along the way are all struggling with it in various ways. It has that pastoral horror that if you liked Midsummer or something like that, you'll probably really like They, because a lot of it is set in beautiful countryside, and you imagine cottages and beaches and these beautiful fields full of flowers and gardens, and it's very English pastoral, but with this underlying layer of darkness. It's an incredible book. Really, really glad it's been republished. I would recommend that anyone who loves dystopia, horror, anything about the arts, if you love art, if you think that art deserves a better place in the world and more respect, you should read this book. It will speak to your sensibility. Yeah, this is so fantastic. And K-Dick was a legend. Okay, next. Next I have a couple of books from Fitzcarraldo Editions, the publisher based in Southeast London, who are, as you know, incredible, and I have been patronising them for a long, long time. One of these is an older one that I hadn't got around to, a fiction text, and the other is a non-fiction text that I was just sent by Claire at Fitzcarraldo. I was sent a PR copy, so thank you so much, Claire. It was a really great read, and let's get into those now. So the fiction text was this book, Hurricane Season, translated by Sophie Hughes. It's originally by Fernanda Melchor. It was the winner of the English Pen Award when it came out, it came out on Fitzcarraldo in 2020. This is a really interesting text. It's a hard read, and so I have to tell you now, trigger warnings for nearly everything. There's so much bad stuff in this book. So if you are triggered by assault, sexual assault, child abuse, paedophilia, anything really, just avoid this book. If you can handle some bad stuff, the writing is kind of incredible. The sentences run on into each other like a huge ball of yarn that you just pull away at, and it just unravels and unravels and unravels. And I think that would be the best way to describe this book, is a story that starts with a very small string and turns into this web of horror, really. A web of horror. It was a very testing read. I found it a very challenging read. I described it to someone at work as, this is a book that is full of sex, and yet not one bit of it is sexy. And there were times when I was reading it on the train on my commute when I just thought, I don't even know if I should be reading this in public, because the things that are described are so awful and heinous. The story is like a murder mystery. It starts with the death of the town witch, who we don't really know anything about, but that's where we start, with her body being found in a canal just off the village. And then each chapter, each part is written from the perspective of a different person who lives in La Matosa, the village. So I think we start with a woman who has a family there, and then we work around until we come to the person who murdered the witch, basically, and why that happened. And as we find out, it just gets more and more horrifying, because there's just so much in there that is really tough. So you might be asking, why read such a horrible, heinous book that's full of rape and violence and horrible things? I can't describe it, but Fernanda Melchor paints this picture of poverty and violence and scarcity that is hard to look away from. It paints a picture of some of Mexico's darkest demons, and I think that makes it worth reading, even though it's horrible. But Melchor's writing and the translation is brilliant. It's so lyrical, and some of the images will stay with you for a long, long time. So yeah, Hurricane Season, beautiful, stunning, horrible, but kind of brilliant. And the other Fitzcarraldo text that I read was, as I said, sent to me by Claire at Fitzcarraldo Editions. This has just come out. It's a non-fiction book written by Matthieu Aikins, and it's called The Naked Don't Fear the Water. Matthieu Aikins is a journalist. He has reported out of Afghanistan since 2008, so you've probably come across his work before. He's written lots of really interesting pieces on what the reality is for people in Afghanistan when he's worked on the ground there. And obviously across his time as a journalist, he has worked with many people and built a whole life in Afghanistan with friends and loved ones there that he is working with, but also that he lives with and loves with, and he has grown to be a part of that community there. And in 2016, one of his closest friends in Afghanistan decided that they were going to flee the country and become a refugee and migrate across to Europe. A journey which we know is incredibly dangerous and kills thousands of people every year. And Matthieu Aikins decided to use their platform as a journalist to tell that story. And Matthieu Aikins actually went undercover as a migrant, as a refugee, and followed the journey with Omar. So burnt his passport and became a refugee. And it's an incredible story. I just can't emphasize enough how well it's written. Obviously Matthieu Aikins is a journalist, so it should come as no surprise, but it's the perfect balance of emotionally intelligent and engaged and sensitive, and also logical and informed and researched and backed up with loads of other sources and data and references to sort of help give context to the journey that they're on. So there's that really focused element of the personal and the broader, wider context within which it sits. And as they journey across, some of the situations that Matthieu Aikins ends up in are really terrifying, and that is the reality of traveling in this way. And it really highlights the dangers of the journey in a really clear, concise way. I think if you're curious about what refugees go through and what the journey is in this particular instance, I think this is a great book to read, because it really outlines the practicalities of what happens when and what's involved in a way that I don't know if any other book does. This book is so difficult to read because the things that they go through are hard. But again, it's really uplifting because it brings hope to a situation which is so bleak. I would recommend that anyone read this, but most of all, I wish that people who were against sort of asylum seeking, or who thought that people seek asylum too frequently, or that there are too many people moving around Europe, I wish they would read this most of all, because it humanises the situation in a way that I don't know I've ever seen before. And I think it really speaks to that part of us that sees that one image that's on the news for a while and thinks, oh, that's awful and we need to change things, and then inevitably becomes hardened and desensitized to it. It reopens up the compassion that we need to have around this issue. I really can't recommend it enough, and it's an incredible work, and obviously it's taken a long time to write this, and it's fantastic. So yeah, The Naked Don't Fear the Water. Finally, I just wanted to touch on a book which came out ages and ages ago, but that I've only recently read and I loved it. And that's Adam Kay's This Is Going to Hurt, the Memoirs of a Junior Doctor. This came out in 2017. It was instantly a huge hit. There's been loads of spin-off secret diaries. Everyone loves seeing inside the inner workings of huge institutions like the NHS. It's really fascinating. And the thing that makes This Is Going to Hurt so readable is that the stories are just hilarious. So funny, such a funny book. Obviously really hard read because the things that people go through in obs and gynae can be very traumatic. But generally, Adam Kay always brings it back with a bit of humour, which is an incredible way to write. And there's just been a new TV adaptation of This Is Going to Hurt with Ben Whishaw playing Adam Kay, and it's a more fictionalised, more narrativized account, and it's brilliant. It's so good, can't recommend it enough. It's really well made, and you really can get a lot out of watching it and reading the book. They bring different things to the table, so it's not as straightforward as just read the book, because they really do both have something in them. But yeah, the main thing that this does is brings to light how difficult it is to work in the NHS, and what a double-edged sword it is to work for an amazing institution that brings free healthcare to an entire country at the point of service, and how reliable the NHS is. And I think at one point Adam Kay says something like, you know, cradle to grave, the NHS is there for you. They will birth you at the start of your life, and they will declare you dead at the end of it. And they're really just there for you throughout, and free at the point of service, which is an incredible privilege that we have in the UK. And then there's the other side of it, which is the 97-hour work weeks, the life and death decision making, the constant tsunami of bodily fluids that he has to wade through, and not even the fun kind. And the hospital parking meter earns more than you do, you know, it's that side of it. And it's the record of his time in the NHS, which is really enlightening. And I think at one point he says something like, people working in the NHS don't have time to tell you what it's like, but I can, because now I've left the service and I want to enlighten people about what it's really like. And I think it's, again, perfectly timed for this day and age where the Conservative government is really trying to strip away the NHS and gradually privatise, and we've already seen how it's slipping into privatisation. And at a time like this, especially with the pandemic, I think, you know, the NHS has been an incredible resource, and we are incredibly lucky, and we need to fight for it to keep it going, because it's one of the best things that we have in this country. So yeah, a great read, really funny, and obviously with an important message as well. So what more could you want? And that's it. And I will be back next week. I will be back next month with a load more books. And until then, let me know what you've been reading. Really keen to get some recommendations now, because I'm sort of running out of things on my list. So if there's something that you've read recently that you love, tell me. And if not, then I will see you next month. Okay, take care.